Hey guys, welcome to the Break the Chain podcast. I'm here today with Mathew Kratiuk. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks, James. Good to be here, mate.
I recommend that everybody fastens their seatbelts for this one. Guns, gangs, meth, homelessness to CEO. Mathew, it would be my absolute honour if you tell us your story.
Yeah, sure thing, James. Thanks very much for having me this morning, mates. It's it's certainly been quite the journey. Pardon me, especially when you say it like that. My life today, James, is beautiful. It's an amazing life. I have remarkable people in my life. I am profoundly in love with my partner. I have great relationships with my family. I have great mentors. I live a life of purpose. I'm very healthy. I'm focused. I live a law-abiding life. It's an amazing life. It really is. I work hard. I train hard, and I have a lot of fun. I really enjoy life. It's been a remarkable journey, particularly over the last 5 years, and especially in regards to transformation, especially in regards to my career, which we'll touch on in a moment. But it's pretty remarkable that only 7 years ago, almost to the day, I was a homeless drug addict of 20 years, living in a park in Sydney and on the verge of suicide. More of that to come, but the last 5 years, mate, in a transformational context has been truly remarkable. And transformation, of course, is something that if you do it well, it never stops, right? So, I was very blessed that over the last 5 years, I've worked for some amazing Australian and global companies. My career really took off, but it really started with a company called High Pages, Home Improvement Pages, or High Pages Group, which is Australia's #1 site to hire tradespeople from. They were the first company that sort of gave me a go. And, I came into that business with all this crazy history and criminal history and all this stuff, which we'll touch on shortly. Even the CEOs of that business at the time, David Vitek and Robbie Sharon-Zipser, were fully aware of this crazy story to this guy that they were employing at the time as a business consultant. I wouldn't find this out months later, but they'd had a meeting and said, no, you know what, someone needs to give this guy a go. David Vitek, the CEO there, would become one of my mentors today he's still one of my mentors. He's the founder or co-founder and CEO of High Pages. Not only one of my mentors, but a beautiful human being that would teach me a lot about compassion and understanding and also leadership. And he would be the guy that would allow me to then progress through High Pages into senior roles and management roles. That would go on for a couple of years. And really, it was just such a great experience in that company. The culture was second to none. Everything they did was remarkable. I then moved up to Queensland. I ended up with All Trades Queensland as the sales and marketing director there, a very big brand up here at the time. It's a $50 million a year company, and then I ended up sort of responsible for the revenue of the business. So that $50 million was on my shoulders, and I loved it, thoroughly loved it. We had a lot of success. From there, moved into a company called GWA Group. GWA Group, of course, are a top 200 ASX listed business. They're a global powerhouse. They are certainly one of the world leaders in regards to water solutions, in regards to bathrooms and kitchens and the like. And they do own brands like Caroma Bathrooms is one of their brands, Meth, Van Dorf, Clark, and a few other big players. So massive company, $500 million a year business, and I was responsible for the commercial operations of Australia. Until recently, of course, and I've now stepped back from GWA and become CEO and founder of a business named Clicked, cliqued.com.au, and we're a full suite digital agency, taking Australian small to medium business on a growth, on a journey of growth, I should say, and absolutely loving it.
This is amazing, isn't it? Because this is the second time we've done this interview because the internet connection copped out the first time, and it's been a fairly rough run the second time round as well. But we're getting going, and this is amazing. And having you told me your story the first time round, I think it was. What was the first thing that happened? I think you became homeless.
So we're gonna start from the scratch. So I grew up in a good home. I've done a lot of speaking around the world, and I hear almost arrogant, naive people have said to me on occasions, my parents were just amazing people. My mother, who is one of my best friends today, could not have possibly loved me anymore. And my father too. My father was a very loving father, and we were certainly spoiled kids. We had whatever we wanted. I went to a private school. Not that we were wealthy at all. My parents just worked their ass off to make sure that we could, we were middle class, but they worked really hard to make sure that Adam and I had the best upbringing possible. But I was just a rat bag of a kid. You got to understand, I was ADD. I was hyperactive. I was the center of attention. I was the class clown, and I was diagnosed with ADD at a very young age, and I was told to take Ritalin by the doctors. And there's a season there where a lot of doctors were just throwing Ritalin and all those pharmaceuticals at kids, which would obviously later on in life have a lot to do with my addiction. But I was a hyperactive kid, and when I took the Ritalin, it calmed me down. It made me roof and da. But kids can be mean, and when they found out that I was taking pills, I remember being embarrassed by it and getting picked on by it, so I stopped taking them, and I rebelled. My family then split up. My father and mother, divorced, and which was a bit of a shock to Adam and I. And then this perfect family, which we thought was the perfect family, sort of split. My father moved over to Cronulla. My mother stayed in Western Sydney. And my brother stayed with my mother, and I actually ended up moving over with my father. By that stage, I'd been expelled from 2 schools, Bankstown Grammar, and then I went out to Cronulla High to live with Dad. And I was then about 15, 16 years of age. Dad was going through his own stuff, right? You don't understand these things when you're a kid, but you understand them when you're a man. And I understand now that Dad was going through some stuff, right? He was trying to do his own journey, and he was struggling, right? So my dad became an alcoholic. He started drinking every day. He'd polish a bottle of scotch every single night. And then you've got me, who's 16, who's starting to flirt with alcohol, drinking quite frequently. I became one of the Cronulla streety kids. I was a skateboarder and all this sort of jazz. And you then had 2 men living under the one roof. I was a young man, but I was a man, physically at least. Both angry, both becoming violent, and both drinking all the time. So, that was obviously a recipe for disaster. There was some shit got pretty ugly for a while there. And that is how I ended up living on the streets. I couldn't deal with it anymore, and I'd run away, and I'd steal Dad's wallet, and I'd do all this horrible stuff. And I ended up living on the streets. So by the age of 16, I was on the streets in Cronulla. I'd become a street kid. And I mean, and make no mistake, man, I'd become a violent kid. Like I'd punch walls in, I'd break everything in the house, and when I'd go to mum's, I'd smash everything up, and they just couldn't handle me, right? And so I ended up on the streets. Now, I'd been expelled from Cronulla High too at that stage, and there was a little place in the park there across the road from Cronulla train station called I can't remember what the name of the park is, but right across the road from Cronulla train station. And this is where all the local kids all the street kids would hang out, right? And we'd be on our skateboards and whatever. But there was a lot of street kids in Cronulla, mate. I'm telling you at the time.
When you say street kids, do you mean just kids who hang out and about on the street? Like that's just.
There was kids that hang out on the street, but there's a lot of kids that were homeless, mate. Like there was a lot of us that were homeless. A lot of which I'm in contact with today. Thankfully, a lot of which have lived through it and come out the other side. But that Cronulla was just one of those places. It was, it's a rough place to grow up, but it was also a great place to grow up. And I just became one of these street kids, and we'd sleep in abandoned warehouses. Sometimes we'd sleep in a mate's garage, or sometimes we'd literally sleep in the park in the middle of the rain. I mean, I remember nights when I was 16, 17, sleeping in the rain, freezing to death, and then going over to Cronulla train station, trying to sleep there, and getting ushered off by the guys there, and back into the park. So it was, this became a part of my identity, and at 16, 17 years of age, it's a really important part where your identity's, being birthed, and it would have an effect on me later on in life. I became, someone that lived a very nomadic lifestyle. If shit got too hard, I just pissed off. If my emotions got too hard, I just ran away from relationships and everything else. It was a big part of what would sculpt who I was, and I wouldn't realise that so many years later. But look, I ended up leaving Cronulla. I left there sort of 18, so I was homeless for a couple of years there, and literally begging for money on the streets and all that sort of stuff. And then took off to Queensland. I was about 18 at the time, and I went up there and I started, by this stage I'd started dabbling with drugs. And I remember, I got some work in Queensland on the bar up there, behind a bar, through a guy that I met, a security guard. I started living with him, and I started working in the nightclubs and the bars. And then I realised, that didn't last long because I'd become a drug addict, right? So I realised very quickly that if I love taking drugs, and so if I just get a little bit more off my dealer, then I can sell that, and then I'll actually cover the drugs that I use, and that's how it started, mate. And it started, 50 pills or 20, 50 pills, and then 100 pills, and then a couple of thousand pills, and next minute you're a drug dealer, well and truly, and you're moving thousands and thousands of pills, and you've started to become a bit of a known head, especially on the Gold Coast because it's a small place, and with that comes the crime and the violence, and the networks of people like-minded in the same place. And before I knew it, mate, I'd become someone that was running around with guns on me and kicking doors in and getting done for extortion and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And this kid that had all these aspirations and dreams at 14 years of being I was an amazing sportsman. Like, I could do anything. I was one of those freaks, right? I could just do anything with my eyes closed. And, I could have been anything I wanted, you know what I mean? At a world level. And I had all these great aspirations, and suddenly, 21, 20 years old, I'm running around kicking doors in with guns and all this sort of crazy stuff. I'd strayed so far from who I was meant to be. And the drugs just started to take over my life. And, around that time, from that time onwards, mate, there was just no structure to my life. There was no normality. It was always one day at a time living. It was always about the now and the next hit and the next high and the next party. And, it was just a mess, and it never stopped. It was like living in a cloud. And it was probably around the year 2000, which is, 20 years ago now, that I sort of came out, and for me, and I started dabbling with ice, and that's when things really changed. To be honest with you, I actually started taking ice because by that stage I was I was taking pills, and I was taking fantasy, and I was having overdoses and ending up in hospital with breathing apparatuses down my throat and machines breathing for me. Like, I'd overdosed 100 times on fantasy and GBH and all this rubbish. It was crazy. And how I'm not dead, I just don't know.
Ice is meth, and GBH is date rape, basically, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Date rape drug. So yeah, that was your part. That was your party. Yeah.
Oh, it was crazy, man. And I ended up in hospital all the time, and just so many times I should have been dead. I mean, I literally had at least 100 overdoses in Southport Hospital. They knew me, they knew me by first and last name. Anyway, so all that craziness, and then, but I would drink a lot too, and when I drank, it made me extremely violent. I was a very, very dangerous, violent guy when I drank. I just did not care. I'd get. I'd been charged for punching police in the face in the middle of Surfers Paradise, for example. So, like, it's just, I was out of control. I just became a completely different guy. And then I'd wake up in a jail cell and just go, oh, what happened? Oh my God, not again. And then ice came along, and I remember the first time I took ice, I was drunk, right? And I realized really quickly that it made me not drunk, and I could actually just keep drinking. And not only did it make me not drunk, but it made me not violent, and it made me the exact opposite. Like, I would, if confrontation came at me, I would actually push away and say, oh, listen, mate, no problems. You know what I mean? And it just calmed me down. It stopped me from making dumb decisions and all this sort of stuff. I didn't realize the link between the chemicals in methamphetamine and the link between, for example, Ritalin that I've been taking as a kid that was meant to calm me down and keep me straight. So
it's the same, anyway, isn't it? Practically.
It is. It's the same. It is absolutely the same chemical. So, but without the sleep deprivation and lack of nutrition and everything else. But yeah. So I started ice then, and that was it, mate. I mean, I smoked ice every day, give or take, every day for 15 years at least. And over that 15 years, literally just completely losing all the good stuff of me, all the beauty, all the honesty, all the just the passion, the purpose, and you just become this empty vessel that's just a soulless vessel, right? You've just lost all the beautiful, articulate things that make you get taken from you, and you can't even see it or feel it or notice it because there isn't reflection, there isn't foresight. There isn't hindsight. There's no planning. It's just this, you're in a bubble that you can't get out of. And, it takes some miracles for that to happen. But, I ended up in jail at one point in Queensland, and that sort of, I had this moment of reality. I was probably about 27 then. It's probably the first moment of clarity I'd had in 7, 8, 9 years. And because I actually didn't take drugs in jail, it's the first time I dried out in so long, right? And I was only in there for 7 months, but I didn't take drugs the whole time. So that old Matty started to come back, the Matty that was a kid, and that realised I'm so much greater than this. Like I could be living such a greater life than this. And I had this moment of clarity, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna finish my parole, and I'm gonna get out of here, right? And I'd made a decision that I was gonna leave Queensland and move over to WA. To get away from it all and start again and da-da-da. Now, as any addict would know, that doesn't work, mate, unless you deal with the problem in the first place. You can go to the moon and try and find a job there. And if you haven't dealt with the problem, you'll find drugs there too. I mean, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you go.
Or something,
You'll find something to numb that, right? And I hadn't dealt with the inner issues, so and that would come many years later. But I ended up moving over to Western Australia with all the great intentions in the world. Yep, that's it. I'm going to change my life, and I'm never touching that shit again, and blah blah blah. And within 2 weeks, mate, it was everywhere. I mean, I was all about it. And next minute, I'm moving more of it than I've ever moved in my life. I then joined a club, an MC, where I became a patch member of that MC. And I was then an outlaw gang member for a period of years. And then I was really in my element at that point, right? So, around that time, I had become someone that had a lot of wealth. I mean, I had a lot of wealth, but all of which I made illegally. And, I could do what I want when I wanted. I had lots of toys and all that sort of jazz. And, from a distance, I certainly looked like the guy that was flying, right? You'd see me, I'd be parked in the middle of, in the middle of town in my SL 500 Mercedes, and I'd have $100,000 necklace around my neck, and I'd be wearing the newest everything and blah blah blah. So it looked like I had it all together, but the fact was, you couldn't have been further from the truth. I was completely rotting on the inside. I hadn't spoken to my family at this point for many years. My father and I had an argument that I don't even remember. It was that trivial, and we'd both said, well, I'm not saying sorry. Well, Mathew, I'm not saying sorry either. So we just didn't talk for years, right? And I'd completely stopped talking to my mother and my brother, and I've just pushed them all out of my life. And, I just become a full-blown ice addict, mate. And I was taking steroids every day. I was taking ice every day. I was taking Xanax every day. I had a gun on me all the time, loaded, ready to rock and roll. And I was an absolute nutbag. How I didn't kill someone is truly a miracle, and I'm so grateful that I never did, because it could have happened a million times so easily. And I was just out of control. And then one day I was on a national run with the boys, and I got a phone call from my mum. We were riding across the country, and so I had all these missed calls. I had like 13 missed calls because there was no service in the desert. And when I got into Adelaide, I had all these missed calls, and I knew something was wrong if my mum's called me 13 times, right? We hadn't spoken, right? So I just knew there's something going on here. And so I rang her back, and I was high as a kite, and I was in the middle of a penthouse party and all this sort of stuff. And she goes, sweetheart, I need to tell you something. I'm really sorry, but your father's been killed. And I just lost it, man. And I said, how? And she said, well, it's possible that he's been murdered, right? And it was a moment I'll never forget. I remember it so vividly, like time stood still. And I just lost it, mate. I flipped out. I broke everything in that hotel. The police came in, they stormed in, and I started throwing them, and it was just messy. And I didn't have emotions then, so I had anger, but I couldn't show tears. I hadn't showed tears in years and years and years, and I'd become this guy that no one gets in, and just this brick wall kind of thing, and everything was dealt with anger and violence, right? And so I just lost my shit. I flipped this hotel room upside down. And you got to understand, my father was nothing like me. He was a completely normal guy. I mean, sure, he drank a lot and all that, but he was a law-abiding citizen. He was a senior accountant, for 40 years or something. He wasn't breaking laws or hanging out with any, shady characters. It was just that the situation of where he died was a bit suspicious. And anyway, it would take some years for them to say, look, we don't know. He may have had a fall. We just don't know, because his body had been in his apartment for a matter of weeks before it was found, which is really hard to do any sort of testing on, because rigor mortis had kicked in so badly. So they just don't know. What we do know is he died from a force blunt injury to the head, which it may have been a slip. We just don't know, right? So, and we never will, sadly. So, but there was a lot to deal with at the time, and I didn't show that to anyone, right? Like I got angry, I lost my shit that night, but then I went back to Perth and just powered on. But what had happened is my drug, I took it out on my body, right? Like I just started smashing myself with drugs. And looking back now, what I realized is that subconsciously, I was killing myself. I was killing myself. I was out of control. I just went completely out of control. I'd lost my purpose, my soul. And what had happened is I felt guilt for the first time in a long time, and remorse. And I hadn't felt those feelings for a very long time. I was, near almost a sociopath. I mean, and then suddenly this massive amount of guilt was dropped on me, and it weighed me down, and it really hurt. And the only way I knew how to deal with it was just, hurt myself. So what happened is I just went completely out of control. One day I walked into my own club, and I ended up in hospital. I had it coming. I was out of control, and I deserved it. So, I then woke up in a hospital bed. I'd been made to leave the club, and this was what at the time felt like the scariest, most painful moment of my life. I had gone overnight from this guy with resource and power and whatever I wanted I could do, and to literally being a physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally shattered human being in a hospital bed in the emergency ward. And there was no one left in my life. I mean, I didn't even have a phone, and everything was taken off me, and I just didn't know what to do next. And if you'd come up to me at the time and said, Matt, this is the greatest moment of your life, I would have somehow found the strength to punch you in the mouth. But you would have been right, Because many years later, what was the scariest and craziest moment of my life actually became the greatest in hindsight, because I realized that was the day that a question was born in my heart, my soul, in my mind. When everything else is gone, when the money, the power, the cars, the influence, your sexy little email signature, if you're a C.E.O. or whatever else, when all that stuff of the world is gone, who are you really? Who are you now, right? Like, who are you when you're just skin and bone? Like, who is Matt Kratiuk? And I had no idea, but it started a journey, right? What then happened is I left the state. I moved over to Sydney, and a dear friend in the club took care of me, and to this day he's one of my best friends. But I was still a drug addict, right? So I couldn't hang around, and I ended up on the streets, and by this stage I was living in Glenfield, and I was robbing drug dealers and smoking ice every night and not eating for 3 days, and living in a cockroach infested, rat infested little dungeon. There was no money, there was nothing, mate. There was just crime getting me through, and it was the hardest period of my life. It was a moment that I refer to as permanent torture. Even when you're asleep, you can feel the torture in your body. It's like a knot that just doesn't let go. And I'd broken up with my partner at the time, and she'd fled off to another country, and I'd lost all my friends, and my brothers and all that sort of stuff, and I just didn't know where I was, who I was, and I didn't know what to do next. And by this stage, I wasn't speaking to any of my family, hadn't spoken in a very long time. And on this particular day, it got too much for me, and I made a decision that, I can't continue. I need to end my life today. I had a gun there that I'd stolen from a drug dealer, and I decided that I was going to put it to my skull and shoot myself. I wrote a letter to my mother and my brother, telling them that I love them and that I'm so sorry and it's not their fault, but I just can't do it anymore. Actually wrote the letter, and then I put the gun to my head. I was alone. I knew that ironically, my body probably wasn't going to be found for weeks, and the same way my father had died. As I put the gun to my head, I had a flashback of my little brother and I playing around the Christmas tree when we were little kids, and I hadn't even thought of this memory once in 20, 30, 20 something years. And I would have been 7, he would have been 3. And our parents had just bought us a golden retriever puppy that we called Huggy. And we're chasing Huggy around the tree, and I'm chasing Adam. Adam's chasing Huggy, and it was just one of those precious moments. Shut up, Siri. It was just one of those precious moments, and it came back to me crisp, clear as day. And Adam I was chasing him, and he stopped, and he looked up at me. Little 3-year-old Adam looked up at me like I was his hero, And I still couldn't cry then, but I was overwhelmed. I put the gun down, and I said, on that moment, I said, no, that's not going to be my legacy. Today's the day that I need to fight, and it's time to get well.
It's amazing. There's something you said right at the beginning. I'm trying to, unravel that back to kind of almost to the start of where the whole thing started, taking that direction. And you said that when you was like really young, you used to punch holes in walls and you'd just be really angry.
Yeah.
Do you know what the source of that anger was?
You know what? I have spoken to the greatest doctors and psychiatrists and thought leaders, and I honestly don't know. I was not abused that I can consciously remember as a child. There was some physical abuse, sure, but I don't feel that that's where it's come from. I'm someone that has a very strong faith today, and I certainly am someone that believes in the spiritual realm. I also believe in divine purpose and callings on people's lives. And my first ever memory ever is a dream. It's a dream where I'm in complete darkness, and there is some kind of light in front of me that I can't articulate into words, and it's a feeling of extreme fear. You can't move, you can't talk. It's a presence. Suddenly, bang! It's there, and you're in front of it. And it's like something sitting on you. You can't move, you can't talk, and it is just the most crippling fear. And that, ironically, is my first ever memory, and it's a dream. And it's a dream I had so many times as a kid. It was a dream that lasted, I don't know, until I was 12, 14 or something. So yeah, it's something I've continued to try and understand deeper and more of. But I feel like it was something spiritual. I feel like there was something trying to hold me back from the purpose that was in front of my life. It failed. I'll add that. It certainly failed. And that's, you could look at my life and say, well, it stopped me from having this great, well, that's rubbish. I'm so grateful for the life I have today, and I'm so grateful for every experience that I've been through, even those darkest, horrific, painful moments where my hair was literally falling out of my body. I love them. They have taught me so much. They have refined me and afforded me so much growth and understanding and vision and power. So whatever it is, it didn't win. But no, I don't believe it was as a result of my family. I don't believe it was a result of, I was just such an angry kid, man. I don't know why. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, that
would make you like that level of fear, and and the power that fear has over you creates such a sense of powerlessness, doesn't it? That you
yeah.
What was interesting is how you kind of that anger drove you out of your own home, and then you felt like a connection to a group of people and a belonging, which you said was actually like really fond memories of living on the street with these people. That's quite something that's quite common, that people who've lived on the street said there's this camaraderie.
We have this, like, I do love Facebook for the fact that it allows me to connect to people I wouldn't have been able to connect with otherwise, and it reminds you also of. I also think it's a dangerous tool that used the wrong way, but I do love that it reminds you of things you did, 1, 2, 5, 10 years ago as well. And I've reconnected with a lot of my crew from Cronulla when we were kids, and there is that camaraderie, man. There's a real camaraderie. I mean, even some of the guys that I've connected with, we had our little tiffs and riffs back then too, like fallouts and whatnot. But they're all like whatever now. Like we're those kids. We're those Nulla kids. We're those Nulla kids. One of my good mates, Guy Murdoch's, just brought out an amazing clothing brand called Beware the Nulla. Beware the Nulla, Nulla. Also at BTN, and this we're all buying it because it reconnects us to that crew. Like, and I'm seeing all these posts on Insta and Facey of all my my fellow crew when we were kids. As rough as that was, and as as up and down as that life was, I know it's going to sound nuts. I'm living on the streets and that. They were some of the best times of my life. Like they were just. We did find this camaraderie. There were so many of us that we always had someone to lean on. I literally always had someone to sleep in a park with, sleep in what we called, what was it called? Miami apartments across from, there's these burnt out apartments. They had syringes and cockroaches and shit on the floor, and we'd be sleeping there, mate, on the floor. But there'd be a bunch of us, and we'd be getting blind and passing out and then getting up and finding a way to get money and do it again. And as crazy as it sounds, it was there was also a level of carefree and just brotherhood, I guess.
Yeah,
it was weird.
I mean, and that kind of move again into the motorcycle club that you joined. I mean, there's still that brotherhood and
absolutely.
And I think I really feel like that brotherhood and that desire to be accepted and loved, essentially. Whatever the group that you're attached to, you'll be doing whatever they're doing. And the same with me. Like, that's how I ended up on a drug addict, is being part of that group and following the.
Absolutely,
yeah.
and it's that old saying, you're the sum of, the 5 people that you hang around. I'm very blessed, mate. I've got some guys that I regard as family from my old club that I'm still extremely close with today. Just a couple of them, and they've been there for me through thick and thin, and vice versa. And then I've got some of my best friends are pastors of churches. Some are. You really got to. You've just got to take people one person at a time, and you can't paint any entity, colour, creed, race with a brush. You're a naive buffet if you do, and you've just got it. There is good and bad in everything, well and truly. So you give a little. I don't subscribe to anyone that says trust no one. I think that's just absolutely stupid. You're not going to have a very exciting, love-filled life if you trust no one. I'm the opposite. I give everyone a little bit straight away. And trust is it's a complex thing. People think it's a box that you give to someone or not. That's rubbish. It's in all lengths, sizes, and shapes. I've got friends that I trust. My beautiful partner who's in there working would have to be one of the most attractive women I've ever seen in my life, and she has I have friends that I could absolutely trust to stay in the house, look after for the night, and do nothing in no way but absolute respect. And that same friend, I could leave them in my house with $1,000 and they'd be out the door. I've got friends that the other way around, where I leave them with $1,000, but I wouldn't leave them anywhere near my missus. So trust it comes in all shapes and sizes, and you've got to figure people out, but you're not going to figure it out until you give them little bits and go, well, you're good at that, but you're not good at that, right? So, and that's the key for me.
I've been taught that respect is something that should be just given regardless, absolutely God-given, and then trust is something that should be earned.
But giving respect is about who you are. It's not about who they are, right?
Yeah.
And you hear this bullshit around the world, you got to earn it. Well, no, you don't. I've earned my right to give you respect, right? I've earned my right to be a respectful human being. Yeah. You haven't done shit. I've done it. If you had any idea what I've been through and back to know that I'm now a respectful human being, and that's what it's about.
I like that.
That's where respect is, right? So, what happened then next, mate, was probably the most important part of my journey, and I ended up ringing the Salvation Army and said, listen, guys, my name's Matt. My life is a schmozzle. I'm in all sorts of shit. And I'm about to die if I don't change my life. And so they put me into a program called the Duralong Transformation Centre on the Central Coast of New South Wales. And you got to understand, mate, I walked into that program an extremely broken, angry, violent drug addict who had only lived a certain type of life for as long as I can remember, right? So since I was a kid, it was all drugs, and I was now 33 years old, right? So it's all I knew. And I'd lived I was this guy that walk around like I'm some sort of tough guy, and I'd walk into the rehab and then I'd intentionally be walking around like this so people knew, like, don't fuck with me, and it's all this rubbish, right? But that's where I was at the time. I was a really broken guy. I didn't know any other way. And so I ended up in this rehab. I was certainly not a man of faith or any of that sort of stuff at the time. And, I was the bad boy of rehab, the king of rehab. Like, what a claim to fame that was. At 33, and I'm the king of rehab. Anyway, so that's it, to paint a picture. That's what it looked like, right? And then I was in the program for 6 weeks. And one of the greatest moments of my life took place. And I was on the phone at the time to my ex-partner. We were in a very toxic, shit relationship. I hate you. And I'm on the phone going, I hate you. And she's like, I hate you too. And I'll fucking kill you. And I'll kill you too. And all this horrible toxic stuff, right? And I'm screaming at her, mate, like on the phone. And there's people literally running away from me, right? And we're standing outside of a chapel, right? And all these other guys in the rehab, guys and girls in the rehab, and they're just going, and they're running, right? And as I'm screaming, this little lady walks out of the chapel. She walks up to me, cool as a cucumber. She goes, excuse me, mate, you need to come inside. Chapel's about to start. And I've just turned around and gone, fuck off, right? I just screamed at her. I had no idea who she was, and I'm back on the phone screaming. Anyway, a couple minutes pass, and I've hung up the phone, and I'm sitting at the table, and then no one wants to come near me, and then one of the guys walks up to me, sort of real hesitantly, goes, "Oi, Matty," he goes, "Bro, do you know who that was, bro?" I go, "Who?" He goes, that lady. I go, he goes, "That's the boss's wife." Oh shit! And I'm sitting at the table, right? And so what they didn't know, mate, it was that just 6 weeks ago, they had no idea. 6 weeks ago, actually, it would have 3 months ago, because it took 3 months to get into the rehab, right? But some months ago, they had no idea, these guys on the program, that I was in a little fibro shack in Glenfield. And I had a gun literally clocked to my head. I mean, I was millimeters away from ending my life. And they had no idea. And I just told the wife of the director of the program to fuck off, right? Like to her face. And in a violent way, mind you. And so I'm thinking, you know what? This is it. They're going to come out and say, mate, they're going to bring the security guard over here. And I don't have the energy to fight anymore. They're going to say, mate, you need to leave the program. We don't tolerate violence. It's our number one rule. You know that. You got to go. And what they didn't realise is, mate, as I'm sitting there for the next sort of 5 minutes at the table with my head in my lap, I'm planning my suicide. I knew that they were going to come and tell me to go. And as soon as they did, they're going to drop me at Wyong train station. I'm going to walk into the park at Wyong. I'm going to grab my belt. I'm going to try and tie it to a tree around my neck and end my life. They had no idea. Right, I had no other options, James. There was no more family left, no friends left. Like, no one had talked to me. I just pushed everyone out of my life. There was no next step. There was nowhere else I could go, eat, money. Like, there's nothing. It was just, I couldn't do it again. And I just made it into that program, like just. And what this lady did next changed my life. She walked out. She said, "Mate, can you stand up, please?" I was like, "Yeah, here we go. Pack your bags, piss off." She goes, "Mate, would you mind if I gave you a hug?" I said, "What?" She goes, "Do you mind if I give you a hug?" I said, "What do you want to hug me for?" She goes, "Oh, because I love you, mate. Come here, it's all right. Let me give you a hug." I was like, "Fuck." I said, "All right, eh?" And I just sort of awkwardly went, She goes, "Come here, mate. It's all right. It's all right. Come here." And she put her hands on my head And she started praying for me. And, mate, I couldn't cry at my dad's funeral sometime earlier, a year or two earlier. And on this particular day, I just exploded, mate. I mean, I just, it's like 20 years worth of tears just poured out of my body. And she just wouldn't let go of me, mate. She said, "It's all right, mate. It's okay. You're all right. We're here for you. We love you. It's okay." And even now, it's hard to talk about. And, to this day, she's someone I'm very close with and I love and adore. And what she did is she showed me grace. She showed me what grace looked like. She was a lady of faith, and the world certainly said that she has the right to tell me to piss off. And she said, "Well, no, I have a strong faith that says that I'm actually not meant to do that, and that I'm meant to love this guy back to life." And that was a moment. Great transformation takes place in moments like that. Transformation takes place in a moment of sacrifice and in a moment of love and grace, and that was the catalyst. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And for me, it certainly didn't happen straight away, but that was when I knew I was in a place where I was safe and I could actually try and work on finding out who Mathew is, reclaiming him, and creating a new life, right? And that's how the journey started. It went on for 14 months. Probably the most important thing that I learned on that journey was, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And by that I mean, if you're making this, one day I was at an NA meeting and it said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. I was at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, had no idea what it meant. And I went back to my caseworker and said, "James, what does this mean? If nothing changes, nothing changes." He said, "Matt, it's really simple." He said, "Where are you?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Right now, where are we?" I said, "Duralong, rehab." He goes, "There you go. There's your answer." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Mate, how old are you?" I said, 33. He goes, "There you go. There's your answer." I said, "What do you mean, mate?" He goes, "Matt, you're 33 years old. You're the king of rehab." He said, "You've been making the same choices your whole life in the same way. You've been hanging out with the same people in the same crowds. You've been getting the same fucking result every single day for 33 years. He said, "How can you expect your life to change unless you're not willing to make a new choice?" And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized from that moment that for my life to change, I needed to make new choices in ways that make me extremely uncomfortable. And they should be uncomfortable because they're so foreign to you. For me at that point, they were that foreign. I've never made choices like that in 33 years. And so I knew it had to be, I had to make new choices to get a new outcome or a new result. And for me, that looked like putting myself around new networks, people that I literally felt so uncomfortable around at first, normal people, right? But over time that would change, and pushing myself out of my comfort zone in regards to physical health and spiritual health and emotional health, and that was key. That was key to the transformation of my life.
I want to ask you a question that I think might be. This is a hard question, man, and I know it is, and this would be the one that I think possibly is the hardest question for you to have to face in your life. But how do you attempt to reconcile not knowing what happened to your dad? Because that, I can imagine how hard that is, and how heavy that weighs.
Yeah, it is. I think that's something that's still in the works for me. I think it's a big reason why I probably had a bit of a mental breakdown over the last sort of year or two. Not mental breakdown, so midlife crisis, I would call it. In particular to death, like I just started feeling like I was always I'm going to die, doom and fucking gloom, and I've got cancer or I've got this or whatever. And that's because my father died so young. And it's because now I'm in a place where I truly value my life, whereas I never valued it before at all. And so it's really important to me, and I love living, and I love my relationships and my family and my partner and all these things. So when you've lived 33 years in a way that you just do not care if you die, which I literally didn't, then there's this profound shift. How do I deal with that? Once again, that's a journey that I'm doing with God. And that's about faith, and that's about faith. That's about handing that over. That's about understanding that it's not going to change the outcome, the way that how I feel about it or not. It's not going to change the outcome. And also probably the biggest one for me is, I love, right next to you, right next to me right now, there's a big photo of me and my dad. I love that. I believe he's watching all of this, and he's just so proud, I believe that, and that gives me so much peace. However, he died. It didn't take long. It was extremely tragic. It was extremely hard for our family, more so for my brother and my mother at the time. But we I have a lot of peace about who he was as a human being, which I actually didn't have then.
Yeah.
And I've learnt to love him even in his passing, and I've learnt to absolutely forgive him for anything. And that gives me peace. I do have some peace that I ended up sending a letter to him at one point about a year before he died to say to him, you know what, I just love you. I don't care whose fault it is. Just know that I love you. And I know he got that letter. So that also gives me a bit of peace. Yeah, we've I guess our family have sort of said, well, they've done everything they can from an investigative point, and they seem to feel that, it's just possibly just a slip, and they just couldn't locate whereabouts in the house that had happened. So yeah, I think there's a bit of peace there, mate, about it. I was able to take his ashes and scatter them at his favourite beach, which also, I had those ashes, mind you, mate. I had those ashes through all that whole experience. So like when I left the club in the emergency ward, it was one of the only things I grabbed, right? And then I literally had I had one pair of shoes, some clothes, and I had this big box of ashes that just went with me everywhere, went into the rehab with me, went in everywhere, so it just never left me. And I'm really glad that I got to keep them. And then scattered them on his favourite beach in Cronulla. So, yeah.
Mate, thank you for answering that. That can't have been an easy one to answer. It seems like, like the healing throughout every aspect of everything is the same. It's like there's elements of surrender and love and forgiveness across the board, and certainly, having faith as well is. I don't know how people deal with these things without being able to operate on some sort of spiritual platform.
Agree.
I don't think it's possible. And
I completely agree. I'll finish with this, mate. For me, if you look at some of the greatest speakers in the world, like Gary Vee or, Grant Cardone or these guys, you'll see a bit of a theme through a lot of what they talk about. In 1935, there were two guys that met to talk about the fact that they were both having issues with alcohol. I believe that was in Ohio, 1935. And what would follow then was the inception of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just these two guys building a relationship for the first time, just to talk about shit that's going on in their life, right? Fellowship, we call it, right? There's so much power in that. Just two guys coming together and say, listen, man, I'm kind of fucked. Like, I don't know what to do. Well, I'm kind of fucked too. So let's be fucked together, right? Like, let's try and figure it out, right? Let's do life together and see if we can make it greater. And that would then spawn Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous today has 2.1 million members currently. And since 1935 to now, there has been billions of lives that have been affected by that program in a positive way. Billions, right? Pretty profound when it was about two guys coming together to have a chat about, how they're doing it tough. And I guess, the 12 principles of AA and NA, or 12 steps, hinges on one profound statement. And that statement is one day at a time, right? Now, if you break that down, Gary Vee would call it falling in love with your process. It's so much easier to just get out of bed in the morning and know that I just have to make it back to bed tonight, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem that fucking hard when you say that, right? Like all I got to do today is live my day in a great way, as best a way as I can, and then get to bed at night. So and then tomorrow's tomorrow, right? And there's so much power in that, right? For two reasons. One is the ability to reflect, right? Now, if you live a day at a time, then at night time, you can actually stop before you go to bed and say, you know what? Well, today I lost my shit at James. That was probably a bit out of. I should probably, you know what, say, you know what, man, I'm sorry. But other than that, I did some really good shit, and had a great day with sales and right. I didn't swear as much today. If you want to stop swearing, obviously, I've given up. But it's about reflecting. How did I do today in my relationships? Did I put enough work in? Right. And greater than yesterday, if you start to live your life that way, greater than yesterday will become a theme to not your life, but to your identity. And then it will actually stop being work. It will just organically happen. And I think that's what's happening to my life. I'm not saying that I'm a fucking guru and I'm sitting on top of the mountain going, right? I'm saying that its transformation has become that important to me that it's not something I feel like I'm working at anymore, right? And I'm not saying I'm far from perfect. I'm saying what happens for me is that it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, right? And if you look at my life over the last 5 years, it has been 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Am I greater than I was this time last year? Absolutely, leaps and bounds. I mean, it's such a better place. And was I better last year than I was the year before? 100%, right? And but that's about understanding that you've got to fall in love with your daily process. You have the power to engineer your life in a way that serves you, right? And that's the key. That's the key. If you bring it back to just today, then you don't have to worry about all the shit from back then. You don't have to worry about all that stuff in front of you, right? You've just got to just for today, right? And it simplifies it. It makes it a far smaller mountain to climb. And when you climb those small mountains every day, by the end of the year, you've climbed a fucking Everest, right? So that's the point. And that would be my strongest advice to anyone out there is just, greater than yesterday, 1 day at a time.
It's amazing. It's so good. If you speak to anybody who's done anything great and ask them how they do it, they just be like, I don't know. I just kept doing the next right thing 1 day at a time.
Exactly right.
Right. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. I'm pleased that it went through this time, and I think it's a really valuable and wonderful story for everybody. So thank you so much. If anyone needs any assistance with marketing, I think that's what you do at Clicked, isn't it?
Yeah, mate, come on board, www.clicked.com.au. So that's CLIQUED. No fancy gimmicks, no downloadable ebooks or surveys or any of that rubbish, just straight hard work and tangible results. Yeah. So feel free to get in touch anytime.
Thanks so much, Matt.
You're welcome, mate.
Cheers,
Take care, guys.
Bye.